Hi, and welcome back to Ninox Learning. My name's Andy Marks. I'm a Ninox programmer and trainer, and in this class, we're going to look at the 5 date and time fields that are available in Ninox. We're also going to explore some of the unique capabilities of the calendar view. This is a powerful way for us to visualize data that is date and time sensitive. So let's go ahead and get started. Now for this lesson, I've created a brand new database and created a single table called dates and times that we're going to use to explore the different capabilities of the calendar-centric or time-centric fields available to us in Ninox. This is a new table. I have not architected its structure yet, so let's go in very quickly and do that. Now, there are 5 different kinds of calendar-centric or date-sensitive fields available to us in Ninox. We're going to explore the use of each one at a time, by looking at them in the form view first. I'm then going to return to this screen, the table management window, and we're going to peek behind the scenes and see how each of these fields is configured and see all the different things we can do to really leverage and use to maximum value the capabilities of these very special kinds of fields. The 5 fields we're going to look at are the date field, the time field, this compound field, the date time field. And this is a compound field because it's one field, one data entry process, but it allows us to store 2 kinds of content in that one field, date and time content. The time interval field, and finally the appointment field. Now, we know from previous videos that when we create a form, the fields appear on that form in the order in which they appear in the data model. For that reason, I'm going to grab a text field and make this the very first field in this data model. I want to be clear, this text field has nothing to do with the use or the operation of the other 5 fields, but you're going to see in a moment why I want it in the table and why specifically I want it to be the very first field, or what we call the landing field for this particular form. I'll save my changes, select the first blank record, and off we go. Now, as I said, this text field has really nothing to do with the date fields. I'm going to minimize it and get it out of the way as much as I can. Now, if you remember back to some previous trainings, we started talking about smart fields in Ninox. Fields that understand the nature of the content that's in them and is able to act on that content. For example, the email field was a smart field that understood that the content of that field was an email address, and by clicking on a single button provided by Ninox, we could compose an email pre-addressed using the content of the field and integrate our Ninox application with the email system on our computer. There were also smart fields that would dial the phone or bring up a web browser and take us to a specific web page. The fields that we're going to look at tonight are also smart fields, but they are a different kind of smart field. Where we previously looked at smart fields that acted on the content, these fields prompt us for content. This prompt not only speeds up and simplifies the data entry process and creates a more streamlined and intuitive user interface, but it also serves to standardize the way data is entered and the way data is formatted within the field. And as we know, standardization is a critical component to creating high-quality data that ultimately can be transformed into valuable information and finally, actionable intelligence. The reason I wanted this text field to be the first field, or the landing field, is because I want you to see what happens as we enter one of these smart or prompting fields in Ninox. I'm currently in the text field. I'm going to turn administrative mode off and, using my mouse and a click, enter the date field, and sure enough, there is our prompt. Now, a couple of things to understand about these fields. The first thing is they are centered content. The content appears in the middle of the field, irrespective of its length, whether it's very narrow or very wide. The content in this field will always appear in the middle of the field. Now, here we see the prompt. Since this is a date calendar field, a small calendar, or what we call a picker, or a date picker, appears automatically and every time we park the cursor in this particular type of field. We will always have the option of selecting the current date by simply clicking today, or we can navigate back in time or forward in time to easily select a day according to a month, a day of the week, and the year. And this format, the 3-letter abbreviation for month, the 1 or 2 digit day of the month with a comma separator, and then the 4-digit year. This is the standard Ninox mask or presentation method for date content in a date field. You will also note that if you leave a date field, the date picker will disappear. Should you return to that field, it will automatically park your picker on the date selected. So if we select September 2nd and then return to that field, it is selecting September 2nd as the default date because that's the current content in the field. If we select today and return to the date field, again, it will highlight today's date with the red box. We can clear a date field using the clear button or by simply parking the cursor in the field and using a delete key and clicking off of the field. So let's go ahead and select the date, Friday, March 1st. The next field is the time field, and this also has a picker that we can use to simplify time content entry. As you can see again, the text or the content of this field is going to be centered. We select the hour. We select the minutes after or of the hour. And let's say we're going to go half past the hour of 4. And then because this is a 12-hour picker, we have to stipulate or specify, is this AM, the hours prior to noon, or PM, the hours post or after midday. In this case, I'm going to select the time 4:30 p.m. and exit the field by simply clicking in the gray area outside of the time box. Like our calendar field, we can select now by simply clicking the button. We can clear the field, in this case by parking the cursor in the field, using the delete key, and exiting the field. Let's go ahead and continue data entry by selecting 6:30 p.m. March 1st, 2019. Now, I bet you can all figure out what's going to happen next. This compound field, of course, has a compound picker that allows us to specify a date and a time using one prompt box. For example, March 1st at 6:30 p.m. could be entered just that easily. And here where we saw two different fields or separate fields, a date and a time field, each with its own picker, the date time or the compound field provides us a single prompt that allows us to easily select the month, day, year, and the hours and minutes and morning or afternoon indicator, all from a single window. Like the date and the time picker, we can navigate back in time by clicking the arrow on the left, or we can go into the future by clicking the arrow in the far top right-hand corner of the picker. Next, we have the time interval. Of the 5 calendar-centric or date-centric fields in Ninox, This is the only one that does not have a prompt. It is, however, masked and formatted automatically by Ninox. Let me show you what we mean. This measures, these time interval fields are used to measure or contain a duration of time. So far, we've identified three fields: the date, the time, and the compound date-time field that measure a point in time, a very specific, unique moment in time that only happens once in the history of mankind. For example, there will only be one 6:30 p.m. on March 1st, 2019. It will last for exactly 60 seconds, and then it will never happen again. That is a point in time. The time interval field is a measure of time. It is formatted to display that time in days. So if I enter 24, Ninox will respond with 1 day. Similarly, 72 hours is 3 days, and 60 hours is 2 days plus 12 additional hours. If I were to enter 94 days, for example, that's 3 days and 22 hours, 2 hours short of 4 full days. A day, obviously, is 24 hours, and this is an excellent tool that we can use when we want to specify a duration of time without necessarily having to specify a beginning or an ending time. For example, we may want to schedule 2 hours every day for a specific task or type of activity. Those 2 hours may not necessarily begin at the same moment every day, but we do want to be able to reserve those 2 hours over the course of a 24-hour day for, again, a specific type of action, task, or activity. Using a time interval field combined with a text field, we can specify the type of activity in the text field and then the duration of that activity in the time interval field. For each individual day, then, we could use the date field to specify on that day when that time interval begins. To follow and conclude that example, we then could use a formula or the code in Ninox to calculate the ending time, which obviously would be the date with the start time plus the interval equaling the ending time. So in this case, if the start is March 1st, 2019, and the time interval is 2 hours, then if we start, for example, at 1 p.m., Ninox will know that the closing or ending time for this interval is 3 p.m., 2 hours after the start. The next and final calendar or date-sensitive field that I want to look at is the appointment field. This is a combination of all of the fields we have seen so far. It allows us to track in compound fashion dates and times in the same field, not once, but twice, specifying a beginning date and time and an ending date and time. Ninox will then also calculate for us the amount of time, the duration that will happen between the beginning and the end. So everything we know about the first 4 fields that we looked at all comes together in the appointment field. This is a smart field in that we are prompted. Now, as I said, it's a compound field because we are storing both date and time content. It, however, doubles up. There is a beginning date and time and an ending date and time, and those are specified using the toggle switches right here at the top of the picker. So let us say we're going to have an appointment that begins on Tuesday the 26th at 2 o'clock p.m. and concludes on that same date at 3:30 p.m. And there we have it. We have a beginning date, March 26th, a beginning time, 2 p.m., or 1400 hours according to a 24-hour clock, with an ending time the same day of 3:30 p.m. When the date of the starting and ending of the period or the appointment are different dates, that will be reflected. I'm going to go back in and toggle to the ending date and time of this appointment and specify that it does end at 3:30. However, it ends 2 days later on March 28th. And as you can see, the second date has been added right here. As we know about all of the date fields, this information will be centered in the field, irrespective of how wide the field is. Whether it's very tiny or at maximum width, the content of the appointment field, like all of our calendar-centric fields, will be centered. Excuse me. Now we've had a chance to see these fields in action, I want to go behind the scenes and look at how these fields can be configured to serve very specific purposes, very powerful roles in our Ninox database solution. And once we've done that, we're then going to look at these date fields in a real-world example to see how they function and how the powerful calendar view in Ninox allows us to interpret events and interpret information and intelligence that is date-centric. To go behind the scenes, let's go back into our table management window and first look at the date field. We will select it and bring up the options that we have. It has been named. We're going to leave it as an optional field. It is not required, but you could specify that entry is mandatory. And because it's not going to be required, we're not going to specify a default value. If you want to specify a default value, you can default to today or the current date. These next four fields, show in calendar, color, show as an anniversary, are the four fields that give us an entirely new level of power and capability. They are unique to the date-centric fields, the calendar-centric fields, and they are fantastic in what they allow us to do. By specifying yes, we want the content of this entire record to be represented in a calendar view or in the calendar form that's built into every Ninox solution. By specifying yes to show in calendar, we open up an entirely new viewing format for the content of this record. When this is yes, the next two fields, color and show as, become extremely important. The with color field allows us to define a background color that all content in the record related to this date is going to appear. Now, it sounds weird, but stick with me. In a few minutes when you see it in action, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. For this particular field, I'm going to select green as my backdrop color. I'm now going to create a second date field in the same record. And I'm going to leave it named date 2. And for this one, I'm going to state yes, show in calendar, and have this one appear in red. Now, very quickly, I'm going to enter content into these two fields. March 1, 2019 in the first date field, and March 22 in the second. Let's leave this form view very quickly and go straight to our calendar by selecting it either in our sidebar or, if you're functioning in full screen mode, by clicking the calendar icon just to the right of the home icon in the toolbar at the top. we see our calendar, and here are the two dates. Friday, March 1st, which was the content of the first date field, and Friday, March 22nd, the second date field. Note that they appear in the proper color. All content related to the first date field is going to appear with the green backdrop, while all content related to the second date field appears in red. These dates down here on the 26th, 7th, and 8th are related to yet a third date field that has specified a blue background. This color coding will be particularly important because it will allow us to very quickly determine the meaning and the criticality of these dates. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to reopen my sidebar, go back into the table, and I'm going to add some content to this text field that I told you a few moments ago we really didn't need. Not only are we going to use it now, but I'm in fact going to add a second text field. And I'm going to size it, put it right up next to that one. I want my two text fields to be on the top row. I want the two date fields to take up the entirety of the second row. Now, watch what we can do. Let us say we have invoice number 21230 to be paid in the amount of $1,500 on this date, March 1st. Let us say, you know what, let's change that. Not paid, but received. We are supposed to receive $1,500 for an invoice we sent to our customer, specifically invoice 21230. We also have an invoice that we have to pay. This is vendor invoice 98745, payment due in the amount of $785. And that due date is March 22nd, 2019. Let's tie these fields together with appropriate field names. We will call this one accounts receivable, cash receipt transaction, and this one will be accounts payable, cash disbursement transaction. This will be our customer payment receipt date, and this will be our vendor payment disbursement date. Now, let's go back and revisit the next of those two fields that I said were so critically important. Now, these date fields are part of a record, the record you see on screen in Form View. All of the fields have content that we can decide whether or not we want to have it appear on the calendar. And here's how we do that. Let's state that we want the invoice number and the amount to appear on the calendar. First, let's see what we have now. March 1st, 2019, we have specified yes, we want that shown in the calendar. And this is what it looks like at this moment. Dates and times, we are beginning to see the content appearing. We see the invoice number, but we're seeing the same content twice. Here in green, invoice 21230, and in red, the same content. This is because on records that have date fields, and when those date fields are set to yes to show in the calendar, the first field on the form is what will show. Note, if I were to remove this content and there was nothing in the first field, all that would then show is the date twice. Here we see March 1st, 2019 on Friday, March 1st. Here we see March 1st, 2019 on Friday the 22nd. Why? Because the first field with content in this record is this field right here, the date field that contains March 1st, 2019. And that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us. So let's put some data back in these fields. Customer receipt of $2,400, vendor payment of $1,200. The receipt scheduled to come in on March 1st, the payment scheduled to go out March 22nd. Let's now tie what is supposed to happen as documented in these two text fields with the date when it is supposed to happen as indicated by these two text fields. We do that using this show as field. We have indicated in this field here that we want the record tied to this date field, in this case, the customer payment receipt date field. We want it to show in the calendar on a green background. The show as field allows us to specify what should appear on that green background. And in this case, what we want to appear is the accounts receivable cash receipt transaction. Similarly, this date field, also set to appear to show in the calendar, specifically the vendor payment disbursement date field, what is going to appear on the red background? We're going to show that as the accounts payable cash disbursement transaction. Just to make sure they show up, I'm going to do a little abbreviation, REC for receipt, and PAY for payment. Save my changes, go straight into calendar view, and there we see it. In green, on Friday, March 1st, we are scheduled to receive $2,400 in customer receipts against invoices that we have sent. And on the 22nd of the same month, March, we owe a vendor $1,200, which we are going to disperse to pay invoices that we've received. We also have these three dates, which appear in blue. We don't know what the blue means, but we know it is not tied to an invoice because we have specified that invoices are reflected in green and red. Invoices that we send out to our customers that create money coming in are reflected in green. Invoices that we receive from our suppliers and vendors that indicate money going out appear in red. I can very quickly look at this calendar and very easily see important things that are going to happen, the detail of those things, a receipt or a disbursement or an appointment, and I can gain a sense of what that specific happening is simply by using and standardizing the colors. Every time I see green, I know I've got money coming in. Every time I see red, I've got money going out. There are other ways we could use this very powerful feature. For example, let's create a new record. And this time, let's specify that this first field, we're going to keep track of the regular football game, and this field will be used to track the opponents in championship games. I'll save my changes. We have a regular game versus Edmonton on January 8th. We have a championship game versus Allentown on April 24th. Let's specify that regular games should appear in blue and championship games should appear in green. And just for the sake of accuracy, let's name these fields appropriately. This is our regular game date. This is our championship game date. Save my changes. Return to calendar view. And once we're in calendar view, let's go back and see the first game, Tuesday, the 8th of January versus Edmonton. We know it's a regular game because regular games are displayed in blue. And if we jump forward to April, here is the championship game versus Allentown. We know the date, in this case Wednesday the 24th of April, and we know it's a championship game because we've used the background color of green to code or to visually specify the kind of game. Green field championship game. So, to review, these date fields have the added ability for us to format or mask them according to a background color and using the show as component to specify what content appears on that background. In this case, the opponent for the regular football game or the content of this field will appear on a blue background for this date, and for this date, the content of the championship game date, the content of the championship games field will appear on a green backdrop. This anniversary field allows us to track the annual anniversary of date-sensitive events, things like birthdays, or things that happen annually, like contracts that have to be re-signed every 12 months, or pieces of equipment that require preventive or corrective maintenance once a year, and we can schedule it out years in advance by simply defining the first date and specifying yes to anniversary, which will enable this date to appear every 12 months. We'll go ahead and select OK. Now, the time field we've already discussed, but keep in mind, time fields do not appear on the calendar. Calendar is date specific only. Ninox does not differentiate between hours of the day when specific events are happening. And what I mean by that is, let's say that we have an event. Remember our customer receipts and our vendor payments? Let's say the customer receipt is happening, this customer receipt is happening on March 1st at 6:30 p.m. And let's create a second customer receipt of $8,250 that's appearing the same day, but for some reason at 4:30 a.m. So now that we have this information, let's flip over to calendar view and see what it looks like. Here we see on Friday the 1st and again on Friday the 22nd, two events are happening. Two receipts on the 1st, two disbursements on the 22nd. I know this is a receipt not only because it says it, because it's coded in blue and payments in green. However, it does not specify the time of day. These records will be presented in order, top to bottom, according to entry sequence. The $2,400 record was put in first. The $8,250 record was subsequently put in second. Therefore, the first record appears on top, the second just below that. If we had 3 more records, all dated to occur on Friday the 1st of March, they would appear in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th position below the $8,250 because they were after this record in data entry sequence. And the last thing I want to point out is if you click on a specific entry in the calendar, it will take you immediately back to that record. We again see this drill down capability where we know something is happening, for example, on the 22nd, and if we want more detail, we simply click on that entry in the calendar to drill down and get the additional detail. I'm going to return to table view mode and look also at the date and time. Date and time, while they are calendar centric, they do not have the options to appear in the calendar because, again, time is not recognized as a specific feature of the Ninox calendar. However, if we look at the appointment field, this allows us to track a span of time. Let's create a new record. And I'm going to name this first text field Event Description. And to make it a little bit easier to track what we're doing, let's move the appointment field right up below it. Disregard the rest of the fields on the screen. Let's say the event description is we have a doctor appointment with Dr. Abrams. The appointment is scheduled on May 7th from 2:30 p.m. until that same date at 4:00 p.m. I'll accept that entry by clicking off of the field. I'm going to save that data and exit administrative mode. Let's go now look at the calendar for May. And here we see dates and times, which is the table, and we see the contents of the first field on a record that is specified to appear in the calendar. Now, I want to be a little more particular about how this content appears. So what I'm going to do is go back into that record, and we're going to say that this date information, I want this to appear in lavender, and I want it to simply show as the event description. Now when I go back and look at the calendar entry for May, we now see the doctor appointment with Dr. Abrams on Tuesday the 7th in the appropriate color. But keep in mind, the appointment field allows us to define events that may begin on one day of the month and end on a different day, possibly even in a different month. Let's say that the event is something far more pleasant than a doctor's appointment, but is in fact vacation. And we're taking that vacation from Monday the 4th of February until Friday the 8th. And we'll just say that it's from, let's go back to our beginning date, from 8 a.m. on the 4th to 5 p.m. on the 8th. We're going to be gone the entire week. Let's go look at February. Pop over to the calendar, jump back to February, and here we see that we have vacation on every one of the 5 days, including the beginning and ending day of this appointment. This appointment happens to be a vacation. Vacation is the contents of the first field on the screen, but more importantly, It is the field that we've specified as the Show As option. And we've specified the background color. So we see it exactly as we would expect to on our calendar with a span and time. It does not specify the time of day on the 1st or the time of day on the 8th when this appointment begins or ends, but it does block out those days in their entirety for the duration of the appointment. So let's quickly review. We have date fields, we have time fields, we have duration, and we have appointment fields, and we have the compound field called date and time. The date field and the appointment field allow us to track date-sensitive content in the calendar view or calendar mode. And both of those fields give us the option to not only specify yes or no, is it to be shown in the calendar, but if yes, with what background color and what specific content. We have the time field that allows us to define a specific point in time on a specific date, or in the case of the appointment field, a specific point in time on a beginning and an ending date. And then finally, we have the interval field that allows us to track a duration of time irrespective of a begin or an end. Simply an amount of time that will pass. The time, the date time, and the interval fields, because they are specific to a time on the clock, do not have the option to appear in our calendar. The date field and the appointment field do have that capability. That's pretty much it for date fields. They're tremendously powerful, and they allow us to look at our data, to look at information in a whole new way. We're going to talk about views a little bit later on in the Ninox Learning series. But today we've seen a very powerful view, the calendar view, which allows us to visualize information and potentially intelligence according to the date when that content is relevant and meaningful. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a lot. Join us in our next video when we talk about how to use choice fields within the Ninox system. Thanks very much. I'll see you in the next class.